डेवलपमेंट ऑफ इंटेग्यूमेंटरी सिस्टम यानी स्किन और अपेंडेजेस किस तरह से डेवलप होते हैं आज डिस्कस करेंगे। चैप्टर नंबर 21 है फ्रॉम लैंगमैन। मेरा नाम है आसिफ कुरैशी और आप देख रहे हैं डॉक्टर आसिफ लेक्चर्स। तो skin obviously is the largest organ of your body and this is something that we have discussed now so many different times and इसकी डेवलपमेंट किस तरह होती है। टू मी इट इज़ अ वेरी एक्साइटिंग टॉपिक बिकॉज आप देखें ना, पूरा जो ह्यूमन बॉडी डेवलप होता है दैट इज कवर्ड इन दिस लेयर ना। तो ये आपकी आउटर कवरिंग है, आपको प्रोटेक्ट करती है और इसके बहुत सारे इंपॉर्टेंट मेटाबॉलिक फंक्शंस हैं। सो इसकी ओरिजिन जानना तो बनता है एंड इट एक्चुअली हैज डुअल ओरिजिन। एक इसकी सुपरफिशियल लेयर है जिसको हम एपिडर्मिस कहते हैं, इट डेवलप्स फ्रॉम द एक्टोडर्म। और फिर जो डीपर लेयर्स हैं जिनको डर्मिस कहा जाता है दे डेवलप फ्रॉम द अंडरलाइंग मेसेनकाइम। वेरी इजी थिंग टू अंडरस्टैंड। स्किन को हम इन दो पार्ट्स में डिवाइड करते हैं ना, अपर जो आउटर लेयर होती है उसको हम एपिडर्मिस कहते हैं और जो लोअर deeper layers and they are known as dermis. So dermis is made up of underlying mesenchymal tissue and epidermis is made up of ectoderm. So ये तो पहली चीज हो गई कि it has a dual origin. Okay. अब particularly अगर epidermis की बात करें, which is actually I just told you is developing from ectoderm. So initially what happens कि the embryo is covered by a single layer of ectodermal cells और ये इस तरह से होता है। So outer layer होती है ectoderm की और नीचे उसकी layer होती है mesenchyme की। So initially this is what the picture is. पूरा embryo इस तरह covered होता है outer layer से जिसका नाम है ectoderm and in the beginning of the second month the epithelium divides and a layer of flattened cells, the periderm or the epitracheum is laid down on the surface. So if you now look at this diagram, this is another additional layer which is now known as the periderm. Okay, so initially there was only one layer, the epiderm, ectoderm, and then over the epiderm now we are getting another layer, the periderm. Now with further proliferation of cells in the basal layer, a third intermediate zone is also formed. Finally, at the end of the fourth month, the epidermis acquires its definitive arrangement and 4 layers can be distinguished. So, अगर आप ये देखें यहाँ से स्टार्ट से शुरू करें, so there are only 2 layers. Outer layer is the ectoderm, inner layer is the mesenchyme. But then जो epithelial cell division है उसकी वजह से there is another layer formed and there are 2 layer stage and 3 layer stage and now finally you get like 4 layer stage. That is one layer, then there is another layer, another layer, another layer. So final जो epidermis की arrangement है 4 layers, that is usually and that's easy to remember, 4th month per 4 layers complete. Okay. अब इसमें जो बेसल लेयर है जो सबसे नीचे है, it is also called the germinative layer, is responsible for production of new cells. So ये जो लेयर है, this is the basal layer and it keeps on dividing और cells बन के ऊपर जाते हैं. The layer later forms ridges and hollows which are reflected on the surface of the skin in the fingerprint. So fingerprint में जो आपको ridges दिख रहे हैं वो ये वाला part होगा obviously, outermost part of the skin which makes ridges and fingerprints. Okay. A thick spinous layer consists of large polyhedral cells containing fine tonofibrils. A thick spinous layer. अब ये different layers जो हैं histology में, I wonder आपने मेरे पता नहीं histology के lectures देखे हैं नहीं देखे हैं, but you must watch my histology lectures to understand कि what are the different cellular architecture of different layers of the skin. There is a spinous layer, granular layer, horny layer which has tough scale like. So these are all different parts of epidermal cellular architecture. अच्छा, cells of the periderm जो सबसे बाहर था are usually cast off during the second part of the intrauterine life and can be found in the amniotic fluid. So बेबी जो पूरा इस periderm से covered होता है ये गिरते जाते हैं और amniotic fluid में इनके debris आपको मिल भी सकते हैं. During the first 3 months of the development, the epidermis is invaded by the cells arising from the neural crest. Important point, these cells synthesize melanin pigment. देखें आपकी पूरी skin में जो melanin pigment बनाने वाले cells हैं they come by the migration of the neural crest cells. Now, as melanosomes accumulate, they are transported down dendritic processes of melanocytes and are transferred intercellularly to keratinocytes of the skin and hair bulb. In this manner, the pigmentation of the skin and the hair is acquired. So basically what's happening कि जहाँ आपके ये cells develop हो रहे हैं these cells of the layer, these are the 4 layers very nicely described here. यहाँ पे तो they are in the making, but here you see this is the basal layer, and then these are the typical 4 layers. सबसे बाहर horny layer, granular layer, spinous layer, and the invading melanocytes. So these are actually the cells which are derived from neural crest cells, and these neural crest cells are migrating and coming to these layers of epidermis to give color to your skin as well as the hair follicles, और जो hair निकलते हैं, you have different colors based on how much melanin you produce. Now, dermis जो है, it is the deeper layer. It is derived from mesenchyme that has 3 sources. Lateral plate mesoderm, ये हम पढ़ चुके हैं already क्या चीज होती है. Supplying cells for dermis in the limbs and the body. अब ये डिफरेंट एरियाज को डिफरेंट सप्लाई लाइन है कि पारेक्सियल जो मेसोडर्म है, इट सप्लाइज डर्मिस के सेल्स इन द बैक, एंड द न्यूरल क्रेस्ट सेल सप्लाइंग सेल्स फॉर द डर्मिस इन द फेस एंड द नेक. सो जो डर्मिस की ओरिजिन है वो किसी एक पर्टिकुलर सेल टाइप से नहीं है. सो हम वर्ड तो यूज करते हैं मेसेनकाइमल टिश्यू, लेकिन डिफरेंट तरह का मेसेनकाइमल टिश्यू डिफरेंट पार्ट्स ऑफ द बॉडी के डर्मिस को ओरिजिनेट करता है. सो ये आपको एग्जैक्टली इसी तरह पता होना चाहिए, याद करने वाली चीज है. ड्यूरिंग द 3rd and the 4th months, this tissue, the corium, forms many irregular papillary structures which are called the dermal papilla, which project upward into the epidermis. Most of these papilla contain a small papillary or a sensory nerve and organ. The deeper layers of the dermis, which are also called the subcorium, contains large amount of fatty tissue. So this is the dermis which is in the making. So that is what we are calling as corium. And then later on it forms the dermal papilla, जो कि mature skin का structural component है. At birth, the skin is covered by a whitish paste which is known as vernix caseosa. So पूरा जो बेबी है वो वैक्सी एक मटेरियल में लिपटा हुआ होता है, उसको हम vernix caseosa कहते हैं. Formed by the secretions from the sebaceous glands and degenerated epidermal cells, also the hair cells. It protects the skin against the macerating action of the amniotic fluid. स्किन हमें प्रोटेक्ट करती है ना बहुत सारी चीजों से. स्किन को भी प्रोटेक्ट करने के लिए जो वैक्स लाइक मटेरियल है उसका नाम है वर्निक्स कैसियो. सो नेचर ने इतना जबरदस्त आपके लिए अरेंजमेंट रखा है कि स्किन को भी प्रोटेक्ट कर रहे हैं. ओके, so remember this diagram. Here we have the initial layers, and then we have all 4 fully formed layers. The upper one is the epidermis, then here is the dermis. Different origin. Epidermis originates from the ectodermal cell, dermis originates from the mesenchymal cell. Some clinical stuff. Pigmentary disorders. A large number of pigmentary disorders occur, and these can be classified as disease of the melanocyte development, यानी कि migration of the neural crest cell में मसला. Function and survival का मसला. Example of abnormalities of the melanocyte function is a disorder known as piebaldism, patchy absence of hair and skin pigmentation, and the Waardenburg syndrome. So these are fancy, difficult names, but these are patches of white skin and hair. There are several types of Waardenburg syndrome, but they share some common characteristic, including patches of white hairs and heterochromia. Eyes में मसला है because that is pigmentation related issues. So iris में भी pigmentation है. The defect arises because of the faulty migration or proliferation of the neural crest cell. अभी अगर आप एम्ब्रियोलॉजी समझ लेंगे तो आपको पैथोलॉजी समझने में आसानी इस तरह होती है कि नाउ यू नो वेरी क्लियरली कि जो स्किन कलर है दैट इज बिकॉज ऑफ द मेलानिन प्रोडक्शन, है ना, मेलानिन से बन रहा है. और मेलानिन बनता है फ्रॉम मेलानोसाइट्स, और मेलानोसाइट्स स्किन में आते हैं बाय द माइग्रेशन ऑफ न्यूरल क्रेस्ट सेल्स. सो ये न्यूरल क्रेस्ट सेल माइग्रेट करते हैं एपिडर्मिस में, तभी हमें स्किन कलर मिलता है. अगर ये माइग्रेशन में इशू होगा देन देयर इज इशू इन द कलरेशन. और सम म्यूटेशंस हैव बीन लिंक्ड टू दीज डिसऑर्डर्स, और उन म्यूटेशंस में एक आपको PAX3, WS1, WS3, just remember the name if you can. Diseases of the melanocyte function include, so these diseases, these two ones, they are actually exemplifying the migration issues of the neural crest cells. Now what we are talking about is the functional issue. Migration ठीक हो गई but वो काम नहीं कर रहा है, and the disease is albinism. So albinism is characterized by globally reduced or absent pigmentation. So neural crest cell migrate कर गए हैं but they are not working fine. These cases are classified as different types of oculocutaneous albinism, OCAs. In most cases, abnormalities of the melanin synthesis or processing produce the abnormality. So there is issue with the functioning of the cell. Okay. अच्छा, vitiligo results from a loss of melanocyte due to autoimmune disorder. So इसमें there is an autoimmune problem and melanocytes were there, they were functional, they migrated well, but because of some issue autoimmune cells ने इनको destroy कर दिया, and once they are destroyed, now they are not able to be working normally. So that's the issue. Okay, so that is vitiligo. So आपको basically हर context में you should be able to identify what is the core issue associated with albinism, what is the core issue associated with Waardenburg syndrome and vitiligo. Fingerprints, the epidermal ridges that आपका अगर आप अंगूठा देखें तो इसमें ऐसे ridges है ना, so these are the ridges which produce typical pattern of the finger prints जो हम सबके unique हैं, अलग-अलग हैं. They form the basis for many studies in the medical genetics and criminal investigations. Okay, in children with chromosomal abnormalities, the epidermal pattern on the hand and finger is sometimes used as also the diagnostic tool. So they are very pattern specific to individuals, and this is very difficult to identify two people with the same fingerprint. That is why it is used in forensics as a marker of identification. Now, keratinization of skin. Ichthyosis is excessive keratinization of skin. It is characteristic of a group of hereditary disorders that are usually inherited as autosomal recessive disorder, but may also be X-linked. And if you can have a look at this figure, you see excessive keratin formation. That is not a normal baby, obviously, and that condition is called ichthyosis. Okay, so this is to show you that skin is such an important organ, and movement of neural crest cell into the skin structures. So ये जो epithelial component है और जो dermal component है और फिर जो migration of the neural crest cell है, these are all important events in embryogenesis. Okay, now let's have a few words about hair. Hairs begin development as solid epidermal proliferation from the germinative layer that penetrate the underlying dermis. So underlying dermis जो है वहाँ से ये solid structures start होते हैं, hair bud की form में, connected with the epidermis basically. Okay, and at the terminal end, hair buds invaginate. The invaginations are now known as the hair papilla, are rapidly filled with the mesoderm, in which vessels and nerves ending also develop. So you start looking here, this is the bud initially, but then it invaginate और ये एक लंबा चौड़ा structure बन जाता है जिसके अंदर फिर mesodermal cells जाते हैं जो blood vessels बनाना शुरू कर देते हैं. So life start हो जाती है उस tunnel के अंदर. Okay, and then the hair shaft starts appearing, whereas the peripheral cells become cuboidal, giving rise to the epithelial hair sheath. ये initially सिर्फ एक टनल बनता है which is the hair bud, but then it canalizes and it gets filled with mesodermal cells. और mesodermal cells जहाँ आएंगे तो वहाँ obviously mesoderm से बनने वाले जो tissues हैं वो develop होंगे. For example, blood vessels, for example, nervous tissue, for example, other cells. And as a result of you see the blood vessels are being invaginating here, they are being produced, and hair papilla accumulate some mesodermal cells, start giving cellular products in the form of keratin and other proteins जिसको हम hair कहते हैं. Now the dermal root sheath is formed by surrounding mesenchyme. So again mesenchymal component. A small smooth muscle also derived from the mesenchyme is usually associated with the dermal root, and that muscle is known as the rectal pylori. So ये जो muscle है ये basically this is also mesenchymal origin. Okay, ये muscle यहाँ जो attach होता है ना, it is able to then change the position of the hair. तो वो कहते हैं ना रोंगटे खड़े हो जाना, that's because of the contraction of that muscle. Continuous proliferation of epithelial cells at the base of the shaft plus the hair upward, and by the end of the third month, the first hair appears on the surface in the region of the eyebrow. So that's where it appears first, and in the third month of life, intrauterine life, and upper lip as well. The first hair that appear are known as the lanuga hairs, is shed about the time of the birth, and is later replaced by bigger, thicker hairs. Okay, जो आज आपके सर पे हैं अगर हैं और पूरी body पर भी. The epithelial wall of the hair follicle usually shows a small bud penetrating the surrounding mesoderm. Cells from these bud form the sebaceous gland. So at the base where the hair follicle is there, sebaceous glands are also connected. They produce sebum which goes onto the surface as well. So here we have little sebaceous glands which produce sebum which goes onto the. अगर कुछ दिनों तक सर न धोएं, शैम्पू न करें तो कैसा ऑयली हो जाता है? That's because of the secretion from this sebaceous gland. Okay, Some clinical stuff, hypertrichosis is excessive hairness. आपने कुछ लोग देखे हैं. I mean, this is an example. A baby with a lot of hair, hypertrichosis, abundance of hair follicles. Okay, it may be localized to certain areas of the body or may be generalized, covering the whole body. Atrichia is the congenital absence of hairs. Okay, so both these are the extreme conditions. One is too much hair, one is no hair, and both have been reported. Now, fingernails and toenails, by the end of the third month, thickening in the epidermis appear at the tips of the digits, and these are known as the nail fields. From this location, these fields migrate to the dorsal side of each digit, forming the nail root, whereas the proliferation of the tissue surrounding each nail field creates a shallow depression for each nail. From the nail root, epidermis differentiates into fingernails, toenails, and do not reach the tips. अब ये बात सारी ये है कि बेसिकली यहाँ पर भी जो डेवलपमेंट हो रही है, दैट इज इफ आई ड्रॉ अ फिंगर फॉर यू, सो दैट्स फॉर एग्जांपल योर फिंगर एंड हियर दिस इज द नेल बेड. ओके, सो नेल के बेड पर दिस इज द एरिया जहाँ मेसोडर्मल सेल्स जो हैं दे स्टार्ट प्रोलिफरेटिंग एंड स्टार्ट मेकिंग द फिंगर नेल फील्ड एरिया. सो नेल रूट में सारे जो सेल्स हैं मेसेनकाइमल, मेसोडर्मल ओरिजिन, and then we start getting sweat glands. Two important categories, eccrine and apocrine. Eccrine sweat glands form in the skin over most parts of the body, beginning as buds. ये भी germinative layer of epithelium से बनते हैं. So you see जो epithelial covering है उसी से ये सब चीजें बन रही हैं. Okay, so thickenings in the epidermis, nails बना रहे हैं. जर्मिनेटिव लेयर ऑफ द एपिडर्मिस, स्वेट ग्लैंड्स बना रहे हैं. सो ये वाली जो लेयर थी आपकी स्किन की, विच इज व्हाट वी कॉल द एपिडर्मल लेयर. सो इसकी जो बेसल लेयर है, जर्मिनेटिव लेयर, यहीं से ये सब चीजें डेवलप हो रही हैं, सारे स्किन के एसोसिएटेड अपेंडेजेस. ओके, right. So these buds grow into the dermis and their end coils to form the secretory part of the gland. Obviously it's the sweat gland, so there will be sweat secreted from it. Smooth muscles are also associated with the sweat gland so that the gland can be contracted and the secretions are poured out. Apocrine जो sweat glands हैं, they develop anywhere there is body hair. जो जगह body hair के साथ associated है, face पर, axilla for example, pubic areas for example, and they begin to develop during the puberty, because axilla, pubic hairs, these are all the secondary sexual characteristics. So इनके साथ ही ये apocrine glands develop होते हैं. Hence these sweat glands open into hair follicles instead of skin directly. The sweat produced by these glands contain lipid, protein, and some pheromones and odor originating from the sweat. This is why अगर आप एक्सिलर आर्मपिट से स्मेल आती है आफ्टर सर्टेन टाइम, बिकॉज वहाँ जो स्वेट ग्लैंड्स हैं दे हैव अ लॉट ऑफ अदर थिंग्स, नॉट सिंपली स्वेट. इट कंटेन्स लिपिड, प्रोटीन, फेरोमोन्स, एंड दीज कंपाउंड्स दे produce an odor. It should be noted that these glands classified as apocrine because a portion of the secretory cell is also shed. तो जो सेल सिक्रेशन निकाल रहा है वो खुद भी कुर्बान होकर सिक्रीट हो जाता है, ठीक है, सिक्रेशन के साथ. Then the mammary glands are modified sweat gland. It's nothing but the sweat gland, so modified तरह का sweat gland है, and first appear as bilateral bands of thickened epidermis also developing from epidermis known as the mammary lines जिसको हम कहते हैं. ये memory line, और इस पूरी memory line में कहीं पर भी memory tissue या nipples हो सकते हैं. You see, these are the accessory nipple. So nipple usually is at this position, but it can be anywhere along the memory line. कहीं पर भी हो सकता है. That's an abnormality obviously, but you see how it is. This is the epidermis, and epidermal invagination produces these lactiferous ducts and ultimately the breast tissue. So this is also the invagination of the epithelial cells. You see, this is a very good diagram to show you. Okay, this is the overlying epidermis, and then the epidermis starts invaginating and then canalizing to form the lactiferous ducts. Okay, in a 7-week embryo, the lines extend on each side of the body from the base of the forelimb to the region of the hind limb. So इस पूरे region में इस तरह के invagination start हो जाते हैं, but ultimately they develop only in the breast region. Although the major part of the each mammary line disappears shortly after it forms, a small portion in the thoracic region remains, and that ultimately makes your breast. Here it forms 16 to 24 sprouts. So these are the sprouts, okay, which ultimately form the lactiferous ducts. Initially, these ducts open into a small epithelial pit. This is the epithelial pit, but later on, this epithelial pit region develops into nipple. Okay, and this is how the product of the lactiferous duct, which is the milk coming into it from the cells, drain ultimately into the nipple. So breast also modified sweat gland coming from the epidermal cells. Okay, so that's all that you have to remember about the embryology of breast. Now, mammary gland associated abnormalities can be polythelia is a condition in which accessory nipples are present. They can be present anywhere along the mammary line. And then polymazia is when a remnant of the mammary line develops into a complete breast. So you have a complete breast here, for example. Inverted nipple is a condition in which lactiferous ducts open into the original epithelial pit. It has failed to evert to form nipple. So nipple बनता ही नहीं है. So you'll see the babies which have inverted nipple. So यहाँ nipple इस तरह से develop नहीं होता. It remains inverted like this. Okay. Adults में अगर आप ये देखें तो I would think of carcinoma, but in babies that is rather showing me कि development appropriate नहीं हुई है. Okay. So that's basically it. Simple chapter, but very important chapter. So remember how your skin is formed by two regions, epidermal origin and mesenchymal origin, and then some neural crest cells migrate in here. Okay, so that's it. फिर आपसे मिलता हूँ अगले वीडियो में. अपना ख्याल रखिएगा.